two of my bosses were Mark Zuckerberg and the other was Elon Musk. And, they're folks who are sort of famous, of being neurodivergent. And almost every single one of my bosses in my career, it might be just like one or two people in my career who were ever my managers who weren't neurodivergent in some way. And so
it's the Silicon Valley. This is the epitome of
very much so.
tech.
There's a fundamental error in judgment that we need to put people into a job that we want them in.
I thought we had settled the debate like a long time ago about the value of preventative healthcare. Preventative mental health care is just as important, and there's a reason that these diagnoses are going up massively, right? I think it's outrageous that people are waiting years to get diagnoses, to get the help that they know they need. Neurodivergence is not a brake on progress. It might actually be part of our solutions. Every piece of bureaucracy, every failed HR protocol, every ridiculous performance review that's designed to try and generate cookie cutter talent with cookie cutter ideas, that is a theft from our future generations, and we have to break that stranglehold of bad ideas before we lose that good future.
Dex, welcome.
Great to be here.
Looking forward to this chat.
Yeah.
We got to know each other through kind of business conversations, exploring synergy. And then in that conversation, we both realized that within a year of each other, we've been diagnosed with ADHD.
Right.
And I was pleasantly surprised by that because of your background in big tech and that kind of intelligence that goes with it. And that the stigma that's still attached to the fact that, in ADHD with the word disorder in it, there's so much association, particularly with kids coming through being diagnosed, they can't then be successful in business in particular. And I want to flip that to you. I want to know almost the journey up to why you ultimately got your ADHD diagnosis.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I spent 15 years in big tech, mostly in the US, and it was a sort of running gag amongst my friends that I was obviously ADHD, and they knew it better than I would because almost all of my friends and colleagues were ADHD. And I would say probably almost every single one of my bosses in my career, it might be just like one or two people in my career who were ever my managers who weren't neurodivergent in some way. And, it was something that was just totally normal in the industry. So
it's the Silicon Valley. This is the epitome of
very much so.
tech, right?
And two of my bosses were Mark Zuckerberg and the other was Elon Musk. And they're folks who are sort of famous, of being neurodivergent. And I got to this point last year where I was beginning to think, I want to be done with this chapter of my life. And 15 years in big tech is a long time, and I was turning 40, and sort of those milestones are very clarifying. And I was getting ready for a new chapter focused on public service. And before I left my role at Google, I thought, what are the benefits? What are the things I should be using before I left? And honestly, one of the most popular, and I knew this because so many people I worked with had all made use of this exact benefit, was you could go and get diagnosed through an accelerated, service through the health insurance at the company, to see if you were neurodivergent. It was such a popular thing amongst the employee base that they'd got this extra add-on for the program. And so I went and used that, and I was diagnosed as ADHD. And it turned out, finding that out at exactly that moment I was having that transition in my life and my career, it turned out to be incredibly liberating. It really prepared me well for that next chapter and beginning to understand in more detail, how is it I think about the world? How is it I interact with the world?
That's fascinating because clearly you were around a tribe and a sort of ecosystem of people that were all and are all neurodivergent. And although you were being told by them, did you really associate with that, or did you kind of almost let it bounce off a bit? My point being that when you actually got your diagnosis, it settled and then you were able to reflect and then face forwards, but it feels like you were almost resisting it a little bit.
Classic ADHD, I think I probably just got distracted. So I probably didn't pay enough attention to it. But it was like one of those things where later, after I got the diagnosis, I went back to those conversations with friends, where we sort of, scratched the surface of these things over years. And I said, no, actually, let's actually talk about this properly now. We're not joking. And, really actually being able to learn from people who have been extraordinarily successful. They've navigated all sorts of amazing environments. They've had, really interesting lives and careers, and they've all done it while being ADHD, and it hasn't held them back in any way. It's actually been a superpower. That's been a thing which has really shaped my thinking on this, and this is something I very strongly believe now. We are not harnessing that superpower in so many parts of our society, in our economy, we've got to actually think, much more thoughtfully about how to do that.
The positioning you, if I may, for people that don't know you, we talk about who two of your ultimate bosses were. Just position yourself in terms of your success, because you're an incredibly successful, credible person. And I think one of the things that's going to come out of this conversation is you can be incredibly successful and still be neurodivergent. Mm-hmm. But to position that, I unashamedly need to know how successful you were. Position that success, so that the person that doesn't know you will appreciate it.
Yeah, so I grew up in the UK in the 80s and 90s, and my dad was a refugee, during the Second World War, and he came to the UK in the 50s, probably had a few pounds in his pocket. My mom was a nurse. She'd come to the UK in the 70s from Malaysia, to work in the NHS, and she was a nurse for more than 4 decades. And life was really tough growing up. And I had this obsession from a really early age about systems. And in particular, like, why is it that some people's lives and why some communities are extraordinarily successful and, they have good lives, and others are really struggling? And, that was something which was both personal, but also I had this sort of intellectual obsession with understanding how the world worked and how we could get more people to have lives that were thriving. And that took me into a career studying and then working on building systems. And I always thought my career would be international. It would be focused on the sort of most massive macro level systems. I started at the UN, realized in about 5 seconds, like most young idealistic people who go to work in international affairs, it's really hard. There's a ton of bureaucracy. There's no money at the UN. If you want to drive change, you're going to need a lot more different actors to be part of that change. And for me, I was always somebody who loved technology as well. I was a big science fiction geek growing up, and the tech industry was the place I chose to go in and work in. And that's where I've spent the rest of my career. Technology is the ultimate system in a way. We live in a technologically driven civilization. It is central to our progress as a human species. And I really wanted to figure out, how do we live humanely with those systems in a way that allows every person, every family, every country to reach its full potential. And looking back at it now, why was I such a weird kid obsessed with systems? Actually, well, it wasn't weird at all. It was simply that I think my brain was configured, to be interested in, to be good at examining systems and to have that systems level view of the world. And like, we're in this age of complexity now, right? The world is so complex, and actually having a systems, level view of things is actually incredibly helpful.
So how successful were you?
Well, I started at the UN. I was, I think, one of the youngest, folks who was writing speeches for the UN Secretary General. That was straight out of my master's degree. I was the first in my family to get a university degree, and then I got 2 of them for good measure. Went to Oxford and got funding to study Russian politics, of all things. And this was right when Russia was starting to, really threaten Western security. So I was very focused on that. And then after the UN, I then went off to Google. I was their first executive speechwriter, worked for all the leadership team, Eric Schmidt, who was the executive chairman. And then I was then poached to go work at Facebook for Zuckerberg before the IPO. And then I was then poached by Elon Musk to go run comms at SpaceX. And then the last several years, I've been working for lots of different leaders, from tech and public service and civil society. And, the piece I'm really focused on now is how we, shape that whole next chapter for our societies and build those thriving societies. So yeah, I've been in a lot of interesting rooms with different people doing cool things.
You're not kidding. Moderately successful, I would say.
But around phenomenally successful people.
Absolutely.
Household names from us.
Absolutely.
Who identify with being neurodivergent.
Yes, you've shared that space and been successful in that space. And those are names that shape society and shape systems, and also have changed the construct of society as well, haven't they? All of those names that you dropped there with pride have changed. So here we are discussing neurodiversity, neurodivergent behaviours. You've, on a very wet, cold winter's day, come into the studio. What do you want to get out of this interview? What's motivated you to come and be such an intelligent man, so successful? Why are you sat here for half an hour with us?
Well, I think this is a really great conversation to have generally, just because there's a lot of people who are in the same boat, I think as where I was. We're people who probably suspect we might have ADHD or are neurodivergent. And in a way, we haven't spoken about it. We haven't even sort of made the effort to get diagnosed, because if we even got that diagnosis, would that hold us back in some way? Would we be taken less seriously by folks? I think there's still an enormous stigma attached to it, in particular, places. And, also I think it varies by profession as well. In tech, absolutely, I don't think it's considered any sort of problem at all. If anything, I think it's
an enabler.
It's an enabler. It's something that gives you, unique skills that are part of giving you, unique capabilities that can solve the problems of the 21st century. But actually, that is the bigger reason, which I'm really passionate about this topic now. We are living in a moment where the whole world is being reconfigured. Why is it so many systems and leaders are failing now? Very clearly. Why are things breaking down? Because a lot of our systems were designed for a different world entirely, the industrial era economy, which no longer exists. Mm-hmm. And if we want to figure out how to give the good life to people, if we want economies that grow, 10, 20 years from now, which is nothing, we need to be doing a bunch of things right now. And we're not doing them. And that is going to require, the hardest political and economic transition in history. And guess what? It's all about systems. And so we're going to need a lot more people who've got those superpowers that can often be found in neurodivergence. And we've got to stop talking about it, as though it's a problem. It's not. It's a unique skill set now at exactly the moment in history where we need all hands to the pump.
I love this. And I think one of the things that we talked about before we started filming was, I know some people eyebrows raise and get frustrated about the word superpower, but by harnessing those skill sets into what could be particularly work focus, that can come at the detriment of mental health, relationships, looking after yourself, getting enough sleep. And I wonder how much of that you saw, and the word you used off camera leading into this was, does that lead to burnout? Because that's the human side, that obsession, that dedication to trying to solve the system, to trying to get the work done by 3 a.m. But actually, that's not healthy. Did you see that? And have you been guilty of that as well? You're smiling like...
I'm like, yeah, I've seen that. I just had to look in the mirror. And it was like, I would pull 2 or 3 all-nighters a week, in Silicon Valley, for years, easily, 100-hour weeks.
Okay, normal.
Right. And that's not a normal way for people to live. That's not a good way to live. I'm not going to say I don't do it all the time now. I still do it too much. But, I think it's a sort of monomaniacal obsession often with, seeing your mission through, completing whatever, thing you're focused on. And, for me, that has been part of why I've been successful. I worked really, really hard, but absolutely everything that got in the way of that mission often, would just be a far distant secondary priority. And I now look back on many of my years in the Valley as just deeply unhealthy, physically and intellectually in a way. You never could recharge. And I actually have a thesis on this for why, again, a lot of things are breaking down. I think there's a whole generation of leaders actually who are physically and intellectually exhausted. Mm-hmm. And they're now being asked to also drive the world and their companies and their communities through this massive transition. And they can't possibly, they're just tapped out.
And yet we've got latent talent. It was described as earlier, wasn't it? Latent talent that we're putting barriers in the way of by stigma and dogma, as opposed to bringing that talent to the fore. And if I switch the conversation, if I can, into macroeconomics of a government, right. We know for a fact in the UK at the moment, the health service is saying we're spending too much on ADHD. Today, Wes Streeting has announced a review of why there is so much more assessment and diagnosis of mental health. And that's being driven by the economics of that. But what we're not seeing is a systems crossover to a modern way of thinking of invest to save in health and save in all of the other portfolios.
Right.
And we've got that industrial nature of that's my portfolio, that's my spend, not enabling savings in other areas.
Yep.
As a systems thinker, give us your perspective on that government level, macro level thinking, without getting political. Sure. It's about change needed, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I thought we had settled the debate a long time ago about the value of preventative healthcare. Yeah. And preventative mental health care is just as important. And, there's a reason that these diagnoses are going up massively, right? Actually, it turns out there are probably a lot of people who never got diagnosed, and there's much greater awareness of it. That is one of the values of living in the information society we now live in. A lot of people are getting life-changing access, to diagnoses, and they are then able to play, fuller, parts in society, to have richer lives, to help grow, our, world and our way of living. And I think, we've got to, get out of this mode of trying to have sort of nice, performative actions, to signal that, we're tough on spending, or, we want to be ultra efficient, with resources, right now, when we recognize actually spending a bit more now unlocks transformative, value just a little bit down the road, right? If there's millions of people who can't play their full part in economies, that is entirely the nature of like why we don't have growth. And I think it's outrageous that people are waiting years, to get diagnoses, to get the help that they know they need. And now, if we make it seem like it's something where they might be frittering away resources, like it's almost like, we're saying these are not legitimate diagnoses and maybe we've overdiagnosed, I think that is a very risky place to be in, when actually there's probably a lot more people who haven't been diagnosed.
Well, absolutely. And society is crying out for it. And, right in the middle of it with the ADHD clinic, you can see that over the last 2 or 3 years, there were funding streams and government-led initiatives to build that. And then, oh, hello, that's costing us a bit of money. We need to close that down now. And yet we've just started to enable the debate and actually get the healthcare to where it needs.
Right.
We've got the right grease to the right squeak, and now we've got a need to close it down because the short-term spend is too high. And we're not thinking about the long-term implications of this. Your systems thinking, just the way you express things, it is fascinating. Never mind what goes behind it, what lies behind it, where your success has come from. And you're now positioning yourself in a whole new career, aren't you?
Right.
And that's about the greater good. And reading your posts and reading about you, what is it that you stand for now, taking all of what you've done before forward?
Well, I mean, because I've had that obsession my whole life about how you build these systems, I think for me, I have such a degree of urgency now about, my work, and it's moved into a different, dimension, because I think fundamentally we're almost out of time now to transform a bunch of things which are fundamental to our way of life. We have come to the end of the road on a bunch of models about how to run our societies, about how to build the good life. And, things are breaking down, I think, a lot faster than, in many ways, people might understand. I come to, just sort of fundamental problems, in my work, and how I'm thinking about things, such as 10 years from now, when AI systems will probably exceed, the capabilities of the average worker, how do you give people jobs? How do you give them a good life? I don't know the answer, and I don't think most policymakers and leaders have even begun to mildly scratch the surface of the answer. If we are consuming, as much resource every 5-6 years as the 50-60 years before that, with our, insatiable appetites as a planet, how is that going to work when advanced AI and all these technologies turbocharges our consumption of resources, and then that crashes into the fact that climate change is happening, it's real, it's having a devastating impact on, countries all over the world, and that might end up overwhelming our capacity as a planet to actually function, in a bunch of ways. We've got 123 million refugees in the world right now, and that was sufficient that it has a massively destabilizing impact on our politics, on our democracy, on our public discourse. You might end up in a world with billions of refugees, 20, 30 years from now. And so, all of this has been leading to this, sort of central, problem, which I keep coming up against, which is, why is it that so many leaders and systems are prepared to rob the future? We have to stop robbing the future, because it always arrives, and we want to live in it, and we want, all of our families and loved ones to have a good future. And we just need to break this stranglehold on our lives that these bad ideas and systems have.
There's been a byproduct of which often can be associated with mental health, poor mental health, where that relentless drive to innovate and to just face forwards, but actually not stop and think about damage being done, collateral damage along the way. It feels like that's a key part of what you're trying to sort of not hit the brakes, but actually make sure that key people now in leadership are looking at the damage being done, what can be done to fix it. And that entrepreneurial version of you've worked for a lot of people in a very innovative way. But I love the fact that that's very much an ADHD trait, if you like, that's brought us together in the entrepreneurial community, to sort of pull back and go, right, I'm going to try and make a difference. I'm going to try and do something that I can be in control of. And I know we're really aligned to try and help you with that.
Yeah.
One of the things I think that will really almost empower a lot of the British people watching this is your journey into Silicon Valley and feeling like you're just literally a family of neurodivergent people. A lot of people in England in particular will be watching thinking, well, I couldn't speak out. I know when I put my LinkedIn post out only a few months ago, the outpouring of people saying, you're so brave, I wish I could do that. I've been diagnosed, but I don't tell anyone because I don't want to affect my status or I don't want to lose my job. And I want to sort of flip that to you, where within the year of being diagnosed and the journey that you've gone on, where it was literally almost normalized and kind of, oh, of course you have, to then that reframing in the UK, what would you say to people that now feel like they can be seen and heard through someone with the success and career you've had so far?
I mean, actually, I was talking to a bunch of students last night, giving them career advice, and I said, this may mark me as an outlier anyway, but like, in a way, like I've never really had that much instinct for like career self-preservation, where like I obsess about the way a bunch of other people think about me. And so, which, arguably has probably caused me as many problems as things it solved. But honestly, like if people are going to judge you as lesser because you have a different way of thinking about the world, and one that, 5 seconds of looking at, the information about it shows isn't actually, some fundamental obstacle to, being a productive, incredibly valuable member of society and a good worker. Actually, it might even be the opposite. It might be something that really gives you unique skills and capabilities. If they're going to judge you as lesser because of that, why do you care about what they think? And like also, we're in a moment now where genuinely like the whole world is changing, and we are finding that we will need new skills. We will need to build totally different companies and, institutions. And you can take all those skills and you can take, a diagnosis that maybe some traditional institutions look down upon, but you can take all of those things and go work somewhere else and build a fantastic career and a fantastic life. Don't worry about over-indexing for this other, part of society, which is fundamentally just not part of the future.
I love that. Is there anything you'd change? Is there anything you would, because you've got, just thinking of the knowledge you've got from the people you spent time with and your sort of use of systems, if you like, kind of going back to that question, but then moving forward, is there anything, if you were in control of that, what would you change?
I mean, I heard that the CEO of Goldman Sachs said this earlier this year, that in the future we're entering now, 90% of everything companies do is completely commoditized. So really it's just that last 10% that will distinguish the winners and the losers. And I don't know about that exact proportion, but like I think that's generally true. Like the vast majority of things, every company knows what needs to be done. We have access to the whole world's information now. It's not that hard to figure out generally what the right building blocks are. But like, why is it some people are really successful, why some companies are really successful, and why others fail? That final, bit of, work, that really distinguishes those two sides is how they eke out the full potential of every capability they have. And so turns out like in that last 5-10% probably, there are people who are thinking about the world differently. They are right there. They're your colleagues. They're sitting next to you. And have you actually harnessed their full potential? That is the difference between being a winner and being a has-been.
Of all the words in the English language to describe the current systems thinking's effect on the future, you said we're robbing ourselves of our future. Now, to me, going back to my policing days, if you'll allow me, robbery is not a crime of turning a blind eye, looking the other way. Robbery is forceful, premeditated, constructed to have an impact, negative impact. And you chose that word. You wouldn't have chosen the word robbery by, and I'm I'm sat here drawing a wow moment out of that, because but maybe it's part of what we're trying to achieve here, is drawing attention to these policymakers, these system thinkers, and saying, you cannot ignore the impact of what you're doing, because you are doing this deliberately.
Right.
You are robbing us of the future, of the planet, of society, of industry success in whatever. Industry isn't about making cotton anymore, is it? It's a service industry more than a manufacturing industry. It's a world of service as opposed to widget production. And You are robbing our future. That's a deliberate act. It's a forceful act. It's a premeditated act. Your word, robbery, rob. Yep. And it just made me stop and think, and I was processing it as you went into another subject, bringing us back. You chose that word deliberately.
Yep.
And then you took us fascinatingly into that 10%. And if we are going to rob ourselves of using the free thinking, the go-getters, the caveman that would go and slaughter, the caveman that would go out and actually throw the spear through the attacking animal to make sure we all survived. If we compress that 10%, the ADHD in that 10%, we are going to continue to rob ourselves of our future.
Absolutely.
I've joined up some dots there. Have I joined them up appropriately in terms of where your mindset is?
Yeah, 100%. Actually, robbery, like the thing that probably inspired that more than anything is, so I spent a lot of my early career as a speechwriter. So every speechwriter ends up with their collection of favorite speeches. Mm-hmm. And one of the best ones ever was Eisenhower when he was leaving office as president. And he gave this speech about the military-industrial complex in the US. And he said, in a final sense, every, bullet fired, every warship launched, every missile, targeted at someone is in a sense a theft from the people of the world. You think about that vast set of resources that could have been employed for the building of a good world and a good life. And that's exactly what is happening now with our failure to do the right things to harness people's full potential, including recognizing that neurodivergence is not a brake on progress. It might actually be part of our solutions. Every piece of bureaucracy, every failed HR protocol, every ridiculous performance review that's designed to try and generate cookie cutter talent with cookie cutter ideas, that is a theft from our future generations. And we have to break that stranglehold of bad ideas before we lose that good future.
Wow.
Yeah, that's not only is that emotive, it's pertinent to where we are in the modern day. And you've sat here and encapsulated that. I want to bring it back to you then, if I can. When your mates in the Silicon Valley, the Valley as you call it, we're saying, well, you're so obvious. We're all ADHD. You're so obviously ADHD. What was it? And where I'm going with this is, we diagnose ADHD on symptoms and impairment. We diagnose through negative. Your mates were telling you you're ADHD, you're obviously ADHD. What was the manifestation of your ADHD? And then the second part of the question is, how's it helped you be the brilliant mind that you are?
I was definitely probably very hyperactive. I have insatiable energy for the things that give me energy, but also definitely probably context switch and navigate across lots of different problems in parallel. It's like, why is it you never read one book? You're always reading 3 different books at the same time. But then also, I managed a lot of crises during my career. And it's a thing, I get asked to do because I'm very good under pressure. And all the places I worked were very, very high pressured. So I think, in a way, I just never felt any of the sort of traits I had there, weren't things that could be employed, in the right environments to actually do, really valuable things.
So there's a key there, isn't there? The right environment allowed you to perform, allowed you to excel. And you talked about being energized by the things that energize you. And I think that's part of our understanding in systems thinking, is we expect everybody to perform in the same environment. And we're not actually, through education, through the workplace, you talk about performance reviews and those kind of things, we're not yet where we need to be with giving people what is the environment that's going to energize you, and how can we then harness that for the greater good of yourself, the greater good of the organization, or indeed the greater good of government and the nation. And there's a fundamental error in judgment that we need to put people into a job that we want them in.
Well, the opposite. We talked about it before, and I'm guilty of this. When I say guilty, I had the personal experience of being so disillusioned at school. I've talked about it here before. Couldn't see any value in learning about abundance and burn or algebra because I wasn't going to use it as an adult. So that kid that was often referred to as someone, have you eaten blue Smarties? Because I wasn't even allowed sweets and chocolate as a kid. I just had so much energy, but I also got totally deflated and uninspired by things around me. And I think, to find your purpose, I had to find it myself. And the system seems to remove that from so many people that then get lost. And I think that's what's so powerful.
The system doesn't enable, does it?
It doesn't. The one size doesn't fit all, right?
Yeah. So, if we're looking for a learning outcome, which is a core message for maybe the individual watcher of this, but I think we can afford to go bigger in our dream here. We're talking to an incredibly learned, well-placed, intelligent man who's and you are incredible to work with. We got to shoot higher. You talk about SpaceX, that's the aim, isn't it? Lower orbit, not just mincing about with what's going on in the classroom. It's systems change, systemic change, government thinking change, longer term change. And people have got to hear that message that short-term thinking is leading to long-term problems. And if we can harness the ADHD energy in a better way, in that 10%, create the islands of competence, give people those chances, we will not be robbing ourselves of our future. We'll actually be giving to the future and paying it forward. And that to me is what we're not doing. We're not paying it forward. And I'm going to stick with your words. We're robbing ourselves of our future.
Absolutely.
And what a brilliant interview.
What can we do to help you? Because I'm conscious of time. You've got a Bloomberg audience. You've got a high-profile business investor. Kind of people watching. We want to help you. We wanted to amplify and raise the profile, if you like, through all these conversations, particularly this one. But with what you're doing now, all that you know and what you're looking to try and achieve, how can anyone help you?
I mean, in a way, you don't need a single person or company to even want to go tackle these sort of macro issues or have any altruistic impulses whatsoever. I wish they would, and I hope they do. But just start with your own self-interest, right? If you want to be relevant as a leader or as an organization or as an industry 10, 20 years from now, you are going to have to transform every part of your organization, every part of your leadership model, every role in the next decade. You have almost no time. And it's, I'll say a decade to make ourselves feel slightly better. It's probably much less than that. And that work must be underway right now. In many cases, it's not, or it's pretty performative. You invoke the magical word upskilling. You hear it at every event. Nobody knows what the heck it is. Generally, it means I'm going to get a dabbling of ChatGPT lessons. That's not upskilling. It is, how do you prepare for that world of complexity and optimize yourself to reach your full potential and all of your employees to reach their full potential? And so, if nothing else, I would say, the best thing you can do is keep having these conversations, to, keep amplifying them, take them to the highest levels and the biggest audiences, because this is one of the fundamental challenges of our time, that transformation. And neurodivergence and optimizing for the way different people within your organization are thinking and navigating the world, that is something which is both, in a way, very straightforward to do now. It's not an intractable set of problems. The thinking has been done on how to do this well, but it's also deeply complex because we run into a bunch of the mess in these decaying institutions. And we've got to break that. If we want to be good leaders, we have to break that.
So we're locked by what we've done in the future. We need to unlock that, stop robbing ourselves. Locked by what we've done in the past. We need to unlock that, stop robbing ourselves of the future, not start to pay it forward.
Absolutely.
And neurodivergence is a key part of that.
Very much so.
There we go.
I knew you'd love this conversation.
Oh, and some.
Yeah. Dex, thank you. You're a busy man.
Me.
You made time to come and talk to me.
No, anytime.
Big thanks.